happening. We have Ishkah, we have Shadow Starshine. For this debate, Ishkah's taken the position that we should define veganism as an animal products boycott, which is primarily against animal agriculture, and not Shadow Starshine's definition that veganism is a way of life that seeks to place the value of animal life, health, and liberty above the value of substitutable classes of good, services, and uses derived from animals. As always, one will be based upon who concedes. If we don't get a vocal concession from either participant, we'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think won the debate. No time limit, light moderation. Thank you both for debating. You can get started.
Hello. Okay, I'll give the opening statement.
Okay. So, how to explain what veganism is? I define veganism as simply an animal products boycott. I make the point of saying it's one campaign tactic among many, aimed primarily at achieving the end of animal agriculture. And that personally, I see the principle behind the action as being grounded in the animal rights movement, seeking collective legal rights for animals to have a refuge in dense wildlife habitat where they aren't subject to human cruelty. In a similar way to how the act of boycotting South African products, or the act of boycotting the Montgomery Bus Company, was grounded in a larger civil rights movement. Other boycotts didn't have a specific name for the identity one took on when boycotting. The principle for why they boycotted was contained in what it meant to be part of a larger movement, for example, being a civil rights advocate. So I would just encourage people to think of themselves as animal rights advocates first, fighting for the legal protection of animals. Though you could also call yourself an animal liberation advocate, fighting to free non-human animals to be able to express their capabilities in managed wildlife habitat or a sanctuary. Excuse my dog. As for why someone would arrive at the ethical conclusion to boycott, it could be a million ways. You just need to tailor your arguments to the person you're standing in front of. It's not important for you to know the school of philosophy you're arguing from, but I'll give you them anyway as an introduction to each ethical argument for an animal products boycott. So, 5 ways to explain the principle that got you into veganism and what branch of philosophy it may be related to. Firstly, hedonistic utilitarianism. The principle of not breeding sentient life into the world where you know you will cause more suffering on a global calculus than happiness. And thirdly, my favourite, virtue ethics. The principle of not breeding a sentient life into captivity when you know you could leave room for other animals to enjoy happy flourishing, being able to express all their capabilities in wild habitat. And so, why not use other definitions? The reason I would encourage people to use the definition an animal products boycott and not other definitions is it gets at the root motivation people have for being vegan without being divisive about which ethical system is best. In 1944, those members of the Vegetarian Society who were avoiding all use of animal products created their own vegan society and came up with the word vegan. They did this after a series of debates in which they voiced their concern that we should also be advocating the boycott of the dairy and egg industries. Now, I acknowledge that one problem with defining veganism as an animal products boycott is people's intuition that when they say, well, would you be okay with hunting wild animals yourself then? But to that I would answer, implicit in the word boycott is an ethical judgment on the activity that creates the product.
Now, I am going to go back on my statements in the earlier debates where I said 100% of people boycotting hunted meat would also reject hunting to eat animals themselves. But for 99% of people protesting animal farming, it's going to be hypocritical to go hunting because you're desiring to prevent the incentives for the killing from ever happening. So you couldn't then go out and do it yourself. It's a positive that we get to really easily conceptually tie this to other boycotts, where someone boycotting South African products during apartheid obviously wouldn't feel comfortable flying over there and joining the police force themselves. And more so than in other definitions where you're just saying you're abstaining from using the end animal products. But I am actually fine with my definition being softer on, for example, subsistence hunters, which my opponent's definition doesn't do. I've got a video on my channel of Penan tribes people in Indonesia explaining how it would be repulsive to them to keep animals in captivity to farm. And I think this is great animal rights advocacy. So again, a positive distinction. So the idea that some tiny 0.001% of people might boycott animal products, who may also feel fine with going out hunting themselves, would just be one of a number of fringe groups you already have under many definitions, like neo-Nazis desiring to boycott animal products and wanting to commit harms against humans, which we simply have to denounce or distance ourselves from in our animal rights advocacy.
Another concern people may have is that boycotting sounds like you're primarily negatively opposed to a thing and just trying to reduce your reliance on that thing. But I would argue you have that with every definition, and that by creating a distance between the behaviour, veganism, and the principle, animal rights, you allow people to see the action as part of a big tent animal rights movement, where you're hoping through the tactics of boycotting, lobbying, starting vegan cafes, food not bomb stalls, and even foraging groups, to create the breathing room necessary for legislation and rewilding, where you can get to enjoy a more compassionate local community and see more animals flourishing in wildlife habitat. To draw attention away from veganism as a political act is to make veganism look simply like an identity one takes on to look cool or be part of a subculture. Whereas people can relate boycotts to other real-world events as great positive coming-together moments under a liberation politics. For example, car sharing during the Montgomery bus boycott, students leading the call to stop subsidising Israel, and before that South Africa. The widespread boycotting of a reactionary tabloid newspaper in the UK that ran stories saying mass suffocation at a football stadium due to overcrowding and fences were the fans' fault. So, boycotting to show your real felt ties to the land you stand on. The first boycott was simply with people withdrawing their labour from an imperialist landlord in Ireland in a desire to build something greater once he'd left. So I think it is very flexible to positive intention. Now, finally, does this definition leave room for any exceptions to the rule? Well, yes, in a way, but I would say a positive one, in that it allows for waste animal products to be used if no profit finds its way back to the person who caused the harm. If you can get a supermarket to redirect its 1,000 loaves of bread containing whey from going in the dumpster to a food bank, that could only be a benefit to the world. Also, it doesn't attempt to include animal entertainment boycotts in what it means to be vegan, and simply leaves that to be included in what it means to be an animal rights advocate. Although it's so similar, one could raise an eyebrow about why someone would boycott animal agriculture and not animal cruelty as entertainment. People already view veganism as simply abstaining from the use of animal products, so we just do have to contend with why awful people like some eco-fascists desire to be vegans and denounce them separately. To try and pretend that someone boycotting animal products can't also be an awful person in other ways is willfully ignorant. In the same way that claiming ex-vegans could never have been vegan for not having understood the ethical arguments is fallacious and off-putting. So, in summary, I'll go over what I think are the best definitions. Firstly, what is veganism? Well, one, an animal products boycott. This is a minimal behavioural commitment with very little confusion about what it entails. The idea that it's a protest allows for other priorities to override the idea, like the need to take vaccines with egg product in them. But either way, it's still a strong commitment to a commercial boycott. It's both the reason the Vegan Society was created and simply the colloquial understanding of a vegan as a person who does not eat or use animal products, but leaves room for veganism. And or two, a way of living which seeks to exclude all use of animals for food, clothing or any other purpose. This includes other boycott behaviours like avoiding animals in entertainment, but is vague about whether it entails a weaker or stronger commitment to the act of boycotting itself. Potentially we could move to solely this one definition when we can afford to give more or less equal focus to campaigning against other industries. So what is animal rights? The philosophy which says animals should be granted collective legal rights to have a refuge in dense wildlife habitat where they aren't subject to human cruelty, with the few exceptions where the law is overridden by right to self-defense or special dispensation from the government, for example, to practice some scientific testing to cure diseases, as well as breed and keep guide dogs for the blind, maybe. I think, so if a fox kills a rabbit because it's the only way it can stay strong and pass on its genes, it's part of a wonderfully delicate ecosystem. I have the choice to pick an apple off a tree and enjoy watching the rabbit. So not wanting to parasitically take away life with instinctual desires to express their high order capabilities for low order pleasure in our hierarchy of needs, which we can find elsewhere. Finally, what is the animal rights movement? So I'd just say more or less the same again, just swapping philosophy for social movement. So a social movement which seeks to gain collective legal rights for animals and to have a refuge in dense wildlife habitat where they aren't subject to human cruelty, with all the provisos again, etc., etc.
Okay, I'll just leave it there, so you can come back on that.
Okay. Just writing some notes.
No worries.
All right. I'm going to give my opening statement here. Okay. In order to discuss which of the definitions on offer is better, I'm going to open with what makes a good definition. A good definition is one that adequately picks out its intended reference. Definitions can be too narrow, such as defining a dog as a domesticated mammal that barks with big floppy ears and a long tail. The issue here being that not all dogs have big floppy ears or long tails. That would exclude corgis and bulldogs, which the definition should include. Definitions can be too broad. If we say a dog is a domesticated mammal, it allows objects we don't consider dogs, such as cats. It's this latter problem, the problem of broadness, that I'll be bringing to charge of my opponent's definition. My opponent has brought the definition of vegan as an animal products boycott, thus making a vegan one who boycotts animal products. My argument is that there are people who can boycott animal products which are not intended for the word vegan, thus allowing in reference that should not be there. I will also argue my definition of vegan, while not perfect, selects reference at a higher accuracy than my opponent's. Veganism is a way of life that seeks to place the value of animal life, health, and liberty above the value of substitutable classes of goods, services, and uses derived from animals. My opponent has chosen his definition for a reason. Other definitions, such as the Vegan Society definition, are unrealistic and narrow. Many vegan definitions imply certain normative ethics or ethical stances, and veganism has a wide variety of ethical stances. Thus, the broadening is intentional and attempts to rectify this narrowing issue. My definition also aims to do this, and I argue it does so without over-broadening as a result. Let's start with analysis of the differences in definition and what their focuses are. My opponent's is fairly simple, an animal products boycott. What is the focus of this definition? What is being boycotted? The answer is animal products. The main focus of this definition is on the product that comes from the animal. My definition has two focuses. One is animal life, health, and liberty. Two is substitutable classes of goods, services, and uses derived from animals. Perhaps for simplicity, we could call my second part the same as animal products and say there is some commonality between definitions. However, what my definition brings to the table is part of the reason vegans are against animal products is the value of animal life, health, and liberty. My definition takes no stance on how animal life, health, and liberty is shown to be of import. It may be from utilitarian calculation or from a deontological perspective. To that, it's neutral. My opponent's definition makes no such reference. To the next point, why is it important that my opponent's definition makes reference to animal life, health, and liberty? Why is making reference to animal products not good enough? Well, someone can abstain from animal products due to health reasons, financial reasons, or because they don't like their neighborhood butcher. Such a person doesn't have to take a stance against that killing animals is wrong. Thus, we bring in the final part, which must do all the heavy lifting to round out the definition: boycott. Does the inclusion of the word boycott do the heavy lifting my opponent needs it to do in order to make his definition good? I argue not. My opponent will argue something along the lines of the following. A boycott either entails or implies an ethical stance towards the process of creating the animal product and thus serves the same purpose as my definition. I'll state this first. Implication is one thing and entailment is another. It's quite clear that my definition entails the value of animal life, health, and liberty as it's explicitly part of the definition. If my opponent's definition merely implies a concept without necessity, while mine entails it, and we both agree the concept is part of what a vegan is, I already have the better definition. So perhaps my opponent can instead state that the word boycott entails an ethical stance against the process of creating an animal product. It would be this statement that I say is false. To do so, let's look at the word boycott under the following lights. How is it stated in the dictionary? How do people use it in sentences? What are some past usages of boycott? In the first light, we look at the dictionary. Withdraw from the commercial or social relations with a country, organization, or person as a punishment or protest. This definition of boycott does not seem sufficient for my opponent's point to be made. One can withdraw from commercial or social relations as punishment or protest, not just because of the process of the creation of the product they make, but instead because of the country's, organization, or person's personal views or other behaviors. This brings me to the second light. Let's investigate some uses of boycotts in sentences. 1. I am calling for a boycott of Beats by Dre because Dr. Dre stated that only Black Lives Matter. Number 2. I am calling for a boycott of Nike shoes because they do not pay their employees a living wage. If those sentences seem to be an appropriate usage of word boycott, whether good or bad reasons, and I appeal to the crowd that they are, this undermines my opponent's position. The boycott of Beats by Dre in that sentence has absolutely nothing to do with the creation of the actual headphones. It takes no issue with their parts, nor their assembly, nor anywhere in its production line. It takes issue with an ethical stance this hypothetical Dr. Dre holds. Likewise, the second sentence doesn't actually have a problem with the material of the shoes, nor entail an ethical relationship about shoemaking, shoe parts, or shoe assembly. It takes issue with how much the employees are paid. The answer is simple: pay the employees more and the shoes are ethical again. This undermines my opponent's definition by showing reasonable examples of how one could take an ethical stance against a product while not being against any component of that product's creation. Thus, it is not entailed. In the third and final light, we look at past usages. In 2020, we have an example of a Wendy's boycott, and I'm going to put this in debate chat. This boycott by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers is over migrant workers taking issue with rampant sexual violence, forced labor, and other human rights abuses present in the harvesting of vegetables, such as tomatoes for fast food chains. Many fast food restaurants pledged support to their cause, but Wendy's did not. Thus, a boycott on Wendy's was initiated. Was this a stance against harvesting tomatoes and other vegetables? Was this an ethical support for the moral value of vegetables? No. It was about human treatment of employees, not the product. How about older examples such as the Montgomery bus boycott? And I will drop another link. Okay, there we go. A boycott taking place from 1955 to 1956 in protest to the racial segregation and unequal treatment of Black people on public transport. Does this entail a problem with bus construction, bus routes, or bus systems in general? No. The bus wasn't being boycotted in virtue of the bus, but instead because of human interaction and a tangential issue unrelated to the product itself. In all three investigated lights, I've sufficiently shown that a boycott does not entail an ethical position to the product or to the production of the product itself. Thus, whether or not my opponent's definition implies it or not, it is less accurate than a definition that is explicit. My opponent is relying on the intuitive notion of why vegans are against animal products. But definitions are not supposed to be vague and intuitive. We don't make the definition of dog, come on, we all know what a dog is. Even if it's true that we all do know what a dog is, that's not the point of a definition. My definition explicitly states in broad enough terms to say why vegans are against animal products without being normatively ethically specific, while being narrow enough that only vegans fit the definition. My opponent's definition is broad enough to allow those who boycott the product, but for non-product related issues, and we simply wouldn't think those people were vegan. As a final point, here are some sentences on offer on how that would go. I am calling for a boycott of animal products because they are produced in factory farms that are environmentally harmful. I am calling for a boycott of animal products because workers are unpaid immigrants who suffer PTSD conditions. Both of these stances would seem reasonable, and none of them entail any value to animal lives whatsoever. By making better conditions for workers or reducing environmental harm, these people would go back to eating meat. Whatever a vegan is, however we define it, it is not the sort of person who is looking for practical issues to go away so they can eat meat again. An animal products boycott is thus an inefficient definition, and I argue that because my definition entails the value of animal life, health, and liberty, it gets closer to the root of what a vegan is. And that's the end of my speech. And I'm just going to go over 3 notes that I wrote down during your speech here. And then you can go over any notes you have of mine.
Yeah, no worries.
You said that it has the goal of achieving the end of animal agriculture. That this is why you're doing an animal products boycott. I want to note that that is absent from your definition. Your definition does not include the fact that it's achieving the end of animal agriculture. Thus, it's not entailed by the definition that that's what it's trying to do. Number 2, you said you are trying to distance yourself from neo-Nazi vegans or trying to avoid other types of vegans who might hold ethical stances that you're against. That's fine, but that has nothing to do with picking out the correct reference for what a vegan is. We can understand how a neo-Nazi vegan can exist because they take a particular vegan stance, but we're against another ethical stance that they have. My problem with your definition is that it includes things that aren't vegan within veganism. The last one is that people already think that vegans just abstain. You made reference to the fact that a lot of people in the world think veganism is just the activity of not consuming animal products. The problem is that it doesn't really fit with people who represent themselves as veganism or as vegans. Vegans have to continuously tell people that it is an ethical stance and that it's underpinned at least by the base values of animal life. And the problem here is that if you made vegan just the activity of not eating meat and animal rights another thing, well, then you need to have another movement that's not the current movement that's going on. You would have to finish the vegan movement and then move on to the animal rights movement. You would have to redefine the entire language that vegans are trying to use right now to convince people to go vegan. So while that might fit what people already think about vegans, it doesn't fit what vegans are attempting to accomplish. You can go ahead.
Okay. Let's see, one sec. So, yeah, I understand a secondary definition has come into popular usage about it being a beliefism, but considering we already have the words animal rights, I'm arguing we should use the primary definition of veganism as an animal products boycott, which is the most colloquially used one. I'll address the confusion about an animal products boycott, meaning that you're protesting animal products. I would define the South African apartheid protest boycott as a South African products boycott. Veganism is primarily against animal farming in the same way that people didn't do a South African products boycott because they were inherently against tropical fruits. They did it because of the method used to obtain the fruits through predominantly black labourers living under apartheid. And to go back to the popular usage of the term, history of the term, I say the Vegan Society made an error in trying to force a meaning onto veganism that didn't represent all the members' reasons for creating the society. The debates that led up to the creation of the Vegan Society were about the dairy industry. They were raised equally from a concern about well-being and rights. So Dr. Anna Bonus-Kingford, a member of the Vegetarian Society in 1944, argued for a total boycott of animal products, saying the dairy industry, quote, must involve some slaughter, I think, and some suffering to the cows and calves. Trying to make the definition of vegan as the doctrine that man should live without exploiting animals was equivalent to defining vegans as people who wear pink hats. It was never going to come into popular usage, and it would have been detrimental if it had. So right there at the outset, you have two diametrically opposed beliefisms, consequentialism and deontology, at the outset of the society, which couldn't survive together as one coherent idea without the behaviorism. Take the beliefism away, and you still have the behavioral preference for one group of products over another. And the principle behind the boycott only splinters further as time goes on. Today you have anti-natalists, vegans who are anti-pragmatically rescuing animals, anti-capitalists, pro-capitalists who think paying taxes isn't vegan. The only thing uniting all of them being the behavior of doing an animal products boycott. In 1975, you had vegan shops who refused to stock the first mock meat veggie burgers because they were so attached to the behavior that they worried if they sold mock meat, they would lose the coherency of veganism as a distinct behavior. So yeah, you can come back on that. basically, I think there's all kinds of political movements that were advocating animal rights, which used veganism as a boycott. But veganism's etymology in vegetarianism is just a behaviorism.
Okay. So half of what you just said was a argument against the vegan society definition. I want to remind you that the particular debate proposition is against my...
It was the history of... Well, it's the history of the vegan word coming into usage and its meaning, and why I think the popular usage is...
We take the same issues towards the vegan society definition. That's my point. So saying that it has problems means nothing to me, because I also think it has problems. I just think mine rectifies them better.
But I'm saying at every stage in history, when someone tried to give veganism a different meaning to what people understood it as like a stricter form of vegetarianism, it ran into problems, and it was never accepted by the larger public.
Yeah, that's fine, but the history of it is not really going to resolve the debate proposition. So,
popular usage, history of words.
The next, well, I'm not relying on popular usage in either issue. So,
I am. I think that's how words the utility of words too. I think, I might desire that the word have something in there about protecting wildlife, but I think it's important that we don't just try and radically shift the definition overnight to something else, when it has to have some continuity. Yeah, from how people understood veganism right now.
I think what's most important about the definition is that it picks out the right reference, that the people who call themselves vegan would say, yes, this is what represents me. This was what defines my stance. And it doesn't include people that do not. One of the things you said is that the only thing that binds them is the activity. That's absolutely false, because a lot of people are there has been a vegan shift of trying to distance themselves from people that they call plant-based. And plant-based people are people who do the vegan behaviors without the ethical stances. Obviously, what separates a vegan from somebody who is plant-based is at least a bare minimum disposition towards why they're doing it. I think what I've written as my definition is that bare minimum disposition. It's just putting the value of animal life, health, and liberty above the products, right? Those things are more important. I don't say why they're more important. I realize that there's multiple ethical stances of why they can be more important, but I think it is important to put in that so that it doesn't just include the activity.
Well, my counter is there's a word, animal rights, which has existed long before veganism, that has historical events. There was a broad tent that already gives the belief, gives the principle, and everything that vegans are is also why they're animal rights person. So I just think for coherency is you explain it as a two-tier system where you have the principle first in animal rights, and then you have the behavior in veganism as a boycott, a behaviorism.
Right, but you're trying to make this distinction between vegans and animal right activists, right? And I'm not I think animal right activist just inherently sounds deontological, which might be a problem for vegans. But why even make the distinction of taking the ethics out of veganism, which seems to be it's almost contradictory, because you're saying that one of the things that binds, one of the only things that binds them is the activity, but you've also put in boycott and argued that boycott includes particular ethical stances. I mean, part of your speech was that it included an ethical stance on the product itself. And do you think that the sentence, I am calling for a boycott of Nike shoes because they do not pay their employees a living wage, is a reasonable use of the word boycott?
Yeah, why wouldn't it be?
Right, I do too, but I didn't mention the product. There's no ethical stance against the product in that sentence.
I call for a boycott of primarily the animal farming, but the behavior that entails is an animal product boycott.
Yeah, I agree, but the problem I said with your definition is it's too broad. Not that it's too narrow, that it's too broad.
Mm-hmm.
So you see how the problem is is that there is no entailment of being against the production or the product itself in just the word boycott.
It necessarily has to involve some protest against the production or distribution, and like the
You just
politics
said
and the human surrounding them.
You just said that I am calling for a boycott of Nike shoes because they do not pay their employees a living wage was a reasonable sentence.
So that's like in the production.
What does it have to do with the shoes?
In the production of the products, the workers aren't being paid fairly. And I would say, the same.
If you want to put the employee rights as part of the production, fine. But then we need to make the distinction that when you say an animal products boycott, it doesn't actually have to do with anything to do with the animals, does it? So obviously it could just be to do with the employees part of the production. If you're agreeing that my sentence is correct and an adequate use of Nike shoes, then you can do the same similar thing towards animal product.
Yeah, I'm saying you should advocate that people boycott primarily the animal agriculture industry, but how you define that identity or that behaviorism is an animal products boycott, because they're the products that you need to boycott in order to make this protest against animal farming.
Yeah, the fact that you need to do a boycott to be against animal farming doesn't say that it's entailed that you're against animal farming in order to do a boycott. That's the problem, right? We're making the charge of broadness, not narrowness. So, like when I gave these sentences, I am calling for a boycott of animal products because they are produced in factory farms that are environmentally harmful, has absolutely nothing to do with the animals.
Yeah, I'm fine with it not being for the animals, but like
vegans fine with it not being about the animals? Because I don't think they are.
It's 99% for 99% of people it's for the animals, but I'm fine with including people who are doing it for like farm worker rights and stuff.
Yeah,
like,
if it's 99% of people who are doing it for the animals, then maybe that should be part of the definition.
No, because we already have a word that does that beliefism, so it would just be trying to fit another word into it would try to fit a different word into veganism when we already have a word for that in fighting for legal animal rights.
I mean, it doesn't matter if we have another word for it. The fact that it's so descriptively accurate that it needs to be there.
Well, so accept literally has come to take on a second definition of figuratively because it rolls off the tongue so nicely. But in veganism's case, I don't think we have any benefits at this point in time to using a secondary definition of veganism, of beliefism, and so should stick to using the primary definition in all circumstances, and just acknowledge, of course, there are people who go a lot further than an animal products boycott, and so hold a commitment to animal rights that means a lot more to them than just veganism.
You're saying that there's no benefit to it, but I think the obvious benefit is that there's currently a vegan movement. There's people out there calling themselves vegan, trying to convince people to go vegan, and what they're really hoping is to convince people of that beliefism. They're not just trying to convince them to take the activity. So if people see that the vegan movement is on the uprise, it's to the benefit of vegans that it includes the beliefism that they're trying to convince people of.
It's to the benefit of animal rights. I mean, it's hard to have a discussion because it is so semantic, but I just see that this word has had a parallel in animal rights, and the etymology of veganism is like the shortening of vegetarian, so taking out the middle of vegetarian to vegan. It necessarily, like, for example, the Black Civil Rights Movement, people don't like people making their identity Black Israelites or Black Muslims as like the focus of the civil rights movement, because it's like it's an identity within an identity which doesn't cover everyone. So,
but it sounded like you already admitted it covered 99% of vegans.
But if you try to word the definition of ethics in there, like we can go on to we can try your definition. It holds contradictory. It's like a tenet of contradictory beliefisms, whereas if you take away the behavior, then they have nothing like holding them together. They're like mutually antagonistic, like wild animal suffering versus like pro rewilding. Like, so you need to have the argument at the level of like which animal rights laws are we fighting for?
I'm not sure what like I get that you're trying to, but I'm not advocating for particulars on ethical stances, merely that I want to include a bare minimum of ethical stances that implies that those who are vegan hold that ethical stance. I'm not trying to entail a particular way of going about that.
I know. I'm just saying that whichever way you do it, you're going to have people who disagree and have contradictory belief systems which don't hold together unless you have the behavior. So, like heroism is like acting bravely. Like it probably entails a principle about what it means to act bravely, but it's first and foremost a behavior. So, well, let's just move to your definition and see whether it's possible to include ethical language in the definition. So seeks to place the value of animal life, health and liberty above the value of substitutable classes of goods. So for me, this has personal connotations. Fighting for the life, health and liberty sounds like rights we grant individuals. I'd say I'm fine with having vegans on board who value carrots, a class of goods, more than the life, health and liberty of the worms we indirectly kill by turning over soil for the birds to feast on. The service I'd like to see us do for animals, non-human animals, collectively, is just not purposefully killing them and giving them enough wildlife habitat that they don't go extinct due to human developments and aren't forced to eat from fields or dig through trash to survive like urban foxes. So the fact that they're in the fields eating worms is like an overflow of the service that we were already given them. But I don't need to respect their life, health, and liberty not to be killed in the fields.
Yeah, but my definition doesn't say that all animal life, health, and liberty trumps everything, right? It says it's above substitutable classes of goods. Now, you can substitute animal products directly with vegetables. That's one of the main reasons for the definition. Now, you can say, well, you can also substitute vegetables for trash, but where does that actually improve the animal life, liberty, or health? Right? Is that an actual market improvement? Where did this trash come from? Trash obviously existed because we already made a product. The point is that you're choosing a way of getting that class, which would be food in this particular example, that prioritizes health, liberty, and life, health, and liberty above that class of goods. You're not putting the class of goods above their life, which is what a non-vegan would do.
No, not necessarily. You can acknowledge that whichever way we farm at the moment, we don't have the technology to avoid crop deaths, and that you have done a service. You have done a service for your own sense of virtue of just of wanting to experience wild animals in the wild habitat, but that when they happen to expand into our agriculture, our field, our farming, that you value being able to eat first, and so you're placing the class of goods above the life, health, and liberty of the animals in that specific circumstance.
Yeah, but what did you do with the word substitutable? If you have to kill something to eat it in order to not die, then that's not substitutable because it was your only option.
Well, no, it's not even that. It's you want to live a healthy life. You could choose a less quality health diet by not eating as many foods that grain foods that might kill more animals. But you know that for human health that you have a high quality of human diet if you eat food with grain in it.
Yeah, but you seem to be implying that my definition implies utilitarianism. But I don't see where that is. You pick a class of goods, which is food, right? And then you put the value of the animals above that class of food. So you choose where you get your food, that highest prioritizes it. Then you can eat the food from that class. It doesn't say how much. It doesn't say eat the bare minimum of that source. It just says choose the source that puts animal life first.
In your definition, it's talking about the person of the animals as individuals, and I don't think that's I don't think someone has to have that ethical commitment. I think in circumstances, I think they can solely want to live a life with more meaning that involves hiking into a wildlife habitat and seeing a flourishing dense wildlife habitat and create borders around their fields, but if worms happen to use it, land into that soil, then so be it. Like, goods have a higher value, like above the value of the animal life in that circumstance.
Okay, well, where did substitutable go? That's the problem. Is every time you use a counterexample, you seem to just exclude
Above the
word.
value of substitutable class goods. Explain to me again how you think that's avoided by substitutable.
Yeah, it means you can replace one type of good with a different type of good.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, that doesn't imply that you can't build. I can't replace building houses with nothing, right? That's not replacing I'm not... a class of good with another class of good. That's just not doing it.
You're replacing the class of good. I'm desiring to replace the class of goods, carrots over worms. What's wrong with that?
I don't understand the objection.
Okay, maybe we could just move on. I don't know. I just don't think that's entailed within. I think in terms of like advocacy, it's like people are going to see that as you wanting like giving civil rights to animals, citizen approach, and I don't think. And it's talking about individual personhood and all these things are like. It's too long. It's not, people aren't going to remember it, and it's not good. So it's just not a good definition for popular usage.
I suppose I don't even understand how your objections even apply to my definition.
Okay, well, you can come back on my one if you want. And they were my objections.
Yeah, I don't even know how to address them because I don't even see how they apply.
Okay, no worries. Where else should we go? History of the all right, so people like to imagine that veganism started when you created the word, the Vegan Society created the word. But going back to the 1800s, there were advertisements in the Vegetarian magazine about people they wanted to find alternatives to leather, like not buying leather. So people throughout history have avoided all animal products, have wanted the animal farming to die, protesting against it. So yeah, you've got like political movements which are working alongside the Vegan Society. The Vegan Society is like kind of like a poetry reading group. It's like people like coming together and talking about how the lifestyle affects their life. But I'm saying you've got like caucuses of animal rights within political movements, which more coherently address like why we're fighting for these principles. So you got in the history, you got utilitarians who led up to and were part of the creation of the vegan movement. The American Vegetarian Society poured its energy into an anti-slavery vegetarian settlement in the Wild West, and its founder, Englishman Henry Clubb, ultimately took a bullet for the Union in the Civil War. And then I've already said about in the debates leading up to the society, you got Dr. Anna Bonus Kingford argued for a total boycott based on suffering of the cows. And also, you got movements like the far left.
I don't mean to be rude, but can you tell me how this is going to lead to the debate proposition?
So the behaviorism of veganism and animal products boycott has a different history to the principle, where the principle comes from in animal rights movements. The history, the popular usage, it's in animal rights. So
therefore, what?
Therefore, the definition of animal rights is a principle, and the definition of veganism is a behavior. The animal rights comes first, and then veganism as a lifestyle comes second.
So you're saying because there's like this history that exists, this is the way we should do it, despite the fact that this isn't what vegans really feel or it represents them.
No,
like it just sounds like you're putting historical precedence above what the people actually use the word for.
I'm going from ancient history all the way up to like today, the present. Like the vegans have a beliefism, but why they have a beliefism is because they care about pursuing like the legal rights of animals. So I think it's contained within animal rights, not within veganism.
Okay, even if you believe that, why is that good? How is that helpful? How is that even descriptively accurate?
Because it's how people like understand where words come from, where what affiliations people have. Yeah, the history of movements. It's good.
So are you saying that if people learn the history, they'll want to change what veganism means?
They'll want to know. They want to use the primary definition, which has always been, which is an animal products boycott, and they'll want to think of their principle as being grounded in the animal rights movements, the animal rights philosophy.
I don't see how that benefits vegans. I don't see why vegans would even agree with this. I mean, it
It
seems
benefits-
that vegans have been against your definition so far because of the lack of entailment of ethical principles. But you're telling me that if vegans learn the history, that all of a sudden they're going to change their mind on that. I don't see that as the case.
What scientific studies have you done to know that people have a majority against this definition? I point to Google saying political usage is a person who avoids animal products. There's tons of other articles and people advocating different language approaches to advocating veganism. And
Well, I'm not sure if you're going to call this a scientific methodology, but I've been debating veganism for 2.5 years now, and I've had thousands of conversations on it. I think I know at least that vegans uphold an ethical stance, and that those who don't, they have a desire to call them plant-based and distance themselves from the label of veganism. Now, I don't know if that passes your rigorous scientific standards. However, I think that's a reasonable enough stance as given my experiences.
I'm happy that the behavior infers an ethical stance. Like I know that it's not just about health. Like you can avoid all animal products in your diet for health reasons, but you can't avoid animal leather in favor of plant leather. So yeah, I think the history up to the present is really interesting. I think it informs the popular usage. I'll read what there was a movement in France called the Vegetarian of insurrectionary anarchists robbing banks to build up their working class communities. There was a Tolstoyan congregation in Croydon, and Tolstoy means Christian anarchist, congregation in Croydon in South London that set up the Vegetarian Society, and that Vegetarian Society was still around in 1944, and one of the pivotal events that played the role in the launching of the Vegan Society. They congregated in a cafe that was run by German socialists who'd fled Nazis, and so their egalitarianism was the reason why they were vegan. There's a quote about how the Vegetarian Society has reason to be grateful to this cafe owners, Walter and his late wife Jenny, for services rendering in the early days of veganism. Thank you for leading so many to a healthier and more humane way of life. And then, as well as simply the vastly disproportionate number of left-wing people who go vegan than conservatives today.
I'm not sure that we're going to be able to squeeze much more out of this.
That's fine.
If you're fine with that, I'd be happy to go just for closing statements, and then we can finish. Do you have a preference of who goes first?
Yeah, no, you can go first. I don't mind. Or if you want to go last, you can go last.
Okay. Oh, no, I'll go. I think my opponent relies on a type of definitional legitimacy through historical prescriptivism. That what a definition should be is something that accurately describes the history of it. Whether or not that's the case, whether or not he's accurate or not really isn't my argument. I don't as much know the history of it as he does, but I'm more of a descriptivist when it comes to language. I want to know how it's being used, how the people label themselves, what those people are attempting to accomplish, and I want that whatever the definition is to represent those types of qualities in order to be legitimate. I don't feel like my opponent's definition really takes those qualities into consideration for the legitimacy of a good definition. So that's sort of where we depart. As I've shown, and my opponent seemed to agree to, there are usages of the words boycott that doesn't really talk about the product, as in the animal and the animal's life, but can more talk about the employees or side effects or personal beliefs of things that are held. Boycott is a very broad thing. Even if it does imply an ethical stance, it's so broad to what the types of ethical stances are that we would include things that we just don't reasonably think are vegan. And I argue that because my definition does include at least a minimalistic ethical stance about the value of animal lives, then whether or not it's a perfect definition or not, it still is a better definition than an animal products boycott.
Okay, so really important positive attribute to acknowledge about my definition is it refers to a broad food category that in its whole food form is easy to distinguish on the shelf. Therefore, experimenting with the diet doesn't need to feel like a burden to take on board in the same way that other definitions include things like researching and seeking out parent companies in everything you buy. all that appeal is lost when you try to include researching and boycotting non-parent companies, as well as having a cast iron meaning in not using any products which has its origin in the body of an animal. It might be that the definition changes over time. You've argued that it should be this other definition, but I don't see. I've argued that personhood and it's a bad direction we want to go in if we want to be focusing on rewilding. Yeah, I think that's it.